their entire bond market, their rates went up like 300 basis points in a day or two or something like that. And they were talking about everyone's pension is going to suddenly disappear in a few hours if the central bank doesn't buy bonds right now, right? We've seen these things threatened before. It's not like we're not seeing them, but every time they plug the dam. But there's going to be one thing where they won't be able to anymore. Right? And we're all saying, just what's it going to be? When is it going to be? We don't know, but we know that it's coming because we see the signs every few months. Something else is about to collapse. It was nickel on the LME, or it was LDIs on the UK, or I think it's going to be something in Japan. Maybe it won't be something in Japan. Maybe it'll be Credit Suisse. Who knows? But it's not going to be like this steady thing from the 70s to the 80s. I think it's going to be like a day or two where everything changes and everyone says, "Oh crap, what do I do now?"
And how bad do you think it is right now as we speak with inflation? I know 6.2% is high. It's not as high as, near 10% that it was earlier this year. But I know that you've mentioned that actually the price of basic necessities is rising higher than that. So if we look at the inflation that we're seeing right now and the crisis that we're seeing right now, what kind of impact is it having on the average person?
Okay, so the reason I go to basic necessities, if you just think about this logically through your head, right? So if the price of basic necessities goes up and up and up, then you're going to have to reduce your spending in other things that are less necessary, right? So let's say even most basic, on your food bill, you're going to buy less meat, you're going to buy more cereal, right? So it's just more bang for your buck, more calories for your dollar to keep surviving. So the effect of that, if a lot of people are doing it, is the price of meat is going to steady or rise less fast, right? Or even maybe fall. And the price of grains and cereals and bread is going to rise the fastest. And that's exactly what we're seeing, right? We're seeing, if you go to the cereal index or the bread index, how much does bread cost? Well, it's rising at its fastest rate since I think data has been recorded. I think from 1987, 1988. It hasn't been recorded that long, but I think it's rising at like 13-14% annual or something like that. That's where all the money's going, right? So maybe apparel or cars or something, they're going down because people can afford less of it and plow all the money into what they need to survive. So that's what's happening. So forget about this number, CPI. I mean, it's not that the CPI is manipulated. Even if the CPI were completely honest on how they calculate it and it was consistent and whatever, it still doesn't mean anything because somebody has to pick what's in the CPI, and you can always accuse that person of saying, "Oh, you shouldn't have picked that because that's not real." And yeah, all those arguments will be right, but that's why you can't measure these things. So you can only use them as heuristics. So if you're going to use a heuristic, make it a consistent one instead of something that automatically changes all the time because that's how they calculate it.
That's a really good point there. And if you do use the CPI based on the basket of goods that was, they used in the 1980s, I believe we're still at double-digit inflation today. We're also seeing at the same time the financial situation for people, the stock market falling for the first year in a while. Last year, it sounds like if people have their money in the system and in traditional investments, then they could be, it could be a rough road for them ahead if we see the cost of living and basic necessities that they need to survive rising, but then, their wealth falling.
Well, that's exactly what's going to happen. We're seeing the money supply now fall, absolutely. I think at this rate, I think for the first time ever, I think it's down. The annualized money supply growth rate is something like -2%, meaning for a whole year the money supply has been shrinking, which means that all of these things that rely on the amount of money in the system, like stocks, bonds, and all the other stuff, they're going to fall. And once they start falling uncontrollably, people are going to panic and say, "Look, I can barely afford food now. I got to get the rest out and put it into real assets." But it's not like people consider this and then think, "Well, when am I going to move on it and when am I going to do it?" And then, "Okay, I'll do it today." It's like it all happens suddenly. So again, you don't want to be part of that happening suddenly. You want to be part of the frustrated group of people now that's saying, "When is this going to happen? Because I know it's going to happen." Yeah, people are not going to the wealth that they think they have because they open their portfolios and they log into their brokers and they see a certain dollar number on their portfolio. most of those dollars don't exist. That's the bottom line, right? And when you have gold and silver, and you have real money stored somewhere, that money exists. You can hold it. You know where it is, right? The value of the dollar value of your stock portfolio, it's not really there. Okay, that's the problem.
Yeah, and I think, for example, the FTX scandal is one way that kind of woke some people up of like, I know people who lost quite a bit in the FTX scandal. That particular event really woke people up to show that if you don't hold your wealth or you have it trapped up in the system, you don't necessarily really own it or can say that it's really yours. Right.
I mean, look, Bitcoin, what was the great thing about FTX, and my personal position on Bitcoin, what I tell my followers, look, if you want to speculate on it, do it. It could be interesting. But don't rely on it to save you in an endgame scenario, because that is extremely irresponsible. The problem with Bitcoin is that it's like a false prophet, right? When you have a real prophet that's saying doom, and then someone else says, well, here's this man-made thing that can save you from it. It's probably not going to work out. The technology, blockchain, that's all fine and good, and I'm sure it will be useful in the future and in the present. And I have nothing against the technology, but when a group of people say that, my brand of money is the real money and it will save mankind, it just doesn't ring true to me. And sometimes you just have to use your intuition. Yeah, I could use my logic and say that Bitcoin was born after the dollar and therefore has to be indexed to the dollar. This is what I say all the time. And the dollar has to be indexed to gold because everything has to go back into the past because there's no such thing as fiat. You always have to continue that chain into the past, which is why everything always goes back to gold and silver, which is why when you have a collapsed society or collapsing society, they always go back to gold and silver, which is why gold and silver always maintain their value, because that's the base of every pyramid. You got to go back to it. So logically, when the dollar falls, there's no more link between gold and Bitcoin goes away too, because when you cut out the middle level of the pyramid, the top layer goes down also.